All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to episode 49 of the Mike to New Haven podcast. Ron Guidry number for all you Yankee fans out there, Louisiana Lightning, the Gator. If you haven't checked out my previous two episodes, I mentioned two because it was a two-part episode that me and my brother-in-law did. We broke down this year's MLB Hall of Fame ballot, who we think should get in, who we think should not. Should the steroid guys get in like Bonds and Clemens? Should they not? So if you want to hear our takes on those guys and all that goes into the Baseball Hall of Fame ballot for this 2021 year, check it out. It's a lot of fun to do it. Again, two-part episode. This episode is pretty cool for me in episode 49 because if you may remember, back in episode 45, I spoke with Bill Cannon, who hosts the podcast Police Off the Cuff and is, of course, a retired NYPD sergeant who had 27 years on the job. Now in episode 49, I'm going to speak with his co-host, who is my next guest, who spent 20 years patrolling the streets of New York City as a member of the New York City Police Department. Joining the force in 1992, he retired in 2012, and since his retirement has kept occupied with plenty of other pursuits. A longtime comedian, he's been performing on stage for over 25 years, an actor as well. He's appeared on shows like FBI Most Wanted and Law & Order Special Victims Unit, and since 2019 has hosted the aforementioned Police Off the Cuff podcast with a former guest on this show, who knows, future guest too, Bill Cannon. Without further ado, Mark DeMayo joins me now on the Mike to New Haven podcast. Mark, welcome. How are you?
What's up, buddy? I got to tell you, man, thanks for having me on.
Uh-huh.
And this is the first time I'm taking a look at you. And I'm very polished, I got to tell you.
Thank you.
The whole upfront intro was fantastic, man. And you're 20 years old. You mentioned that earlier. And I don't know. Do you put the part on that we were talking before? Or you?
No. That I always get.
Yeah, I'll just mention it. I said you look. I appreciate that you wore the suit for me tonight. You didn't have to. If you would have worn like a going out to the club shirt, I would have. It would have been fine too. But you look very handsome.
Thank you.
And you're 20, and I told you, I have a 21-year-old daughter, I mentioned, and I also told you her name is Sophia. And the reason why I told you that is because I want to make sure that you stay away from her.
You have my word.
I'm just kidding. I think if she came home with you, she has a boyfriend now, but if she came home with you, I'd be very happy.
Well, that's very nice of you to say. I appreciate that. So we'll get right into it. You've mentioned your background on Off the Cuff, and your background is it's really funny. It's a really interesting. It's such a, huh?
Are you Dominican?
Yes, I am actually.
Yeah, isn't that funny?
Yeah.
I'm half Dominican.
I know. Man, you spotted that right away too. That's impressive. I'm half Dominican, half Puerto Rican. So that was a really impressive spot by you. So you mentioned it. You were half Dominican. What is it? The other half is like Slovakian, something like that?
Yeah, Czech.
Czechoslovakian. So you grew up in Astoria, Queens.
Czech Republic now.
Yeah, take me through it. That's an interesting background that you have. It's so New York.
Oh, I grew up in Astoria,
and
my mom and dad split when I was young, and I was acting up a lot in school, so I got sent away to boarding school. And that's where I pretty much, stayed for like 8 years, like almost like a little prison up there. And I wasn't a prison; it was a school. There's actually, you can look it up. It's got a Facebook page, St. Patrick's Military Academy.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, you would. I could picture you there. You would have done well. You would have probably been like our leader. You would have probably been our. You probably got up to technical sergeant. I was going to be a sergeant, and then I got busted to corporal, like the week of our graduation, as a matter of fact.
Really?
Yeah, I was going to throw this kid down the laundry chute. Now, I'm going to tell you something right now. It sounds like I was being bad, but mean, but no, the kids loved it. We were on the third floor of this building in Harriman, New York, and the laundry chute was this silver thing, right? It was made out of I guess tin or whatever, like whatever you can bend piping around. I don't know, sheet metal, that's what it is, right? And it was polished, so it would the clothes would make it all the way down. But if you threw a kid down there, they were going down 3 stories fast, and they loved it. And there was a big a clothes bin at the bottom, a big hamper full of all the clothes, and they used to land in it. Then they used to come up, run back up the stairs, 3 flights, come back and beg me to do it again. So they had this situation where I was going to get promoted in 8th grade. Right before I got promoted, you bring your coat downstairs, your dress uniform, and they take off your old, the seamstress in the school takes off your old stripes, and she puts on your new stripes, your promotion. So I was going from a corporal to a sergeant. I came down one morning, 2 days before the graduation. And there was I put my coat there. I mean, my graduation uniform. When I came back for dinner, the new stripes were on. I brought it upstairs. That night, I threw the kid down the. It wasn't just one kid. I was throwing. There was like 5 kids in line to go down the ride.
Yeah,
It,
typical debauchery.
it wasn't a ride, but
Yeah.
they loved it. And then one of the headmasters came in and saw me with the kid in the air, ready to drop him down. So he's like, I had to bring my coat down the next day, my uniform down, and for breakfast. And then they took my sergeant stripes off and they put my corporal stripes back on. And I went back. I brought it back up at dinner time for graduation the next day.
Man, that stinks, man. Because no, it's not what it looks like. I can just picture that in my head. But man, so it's interesting because I didn't that part I didn't know. So like being in a structured environment like that, is that what made you want to become a police officer?
I guess it definitely I got a lot of discipline out of it. Like just I don't know how to explain it. There was a religious overtone to it, so you had a very good understanding of what right and wrong was, and way to study. You learned a way to study. You learned, how to fold your clothes, how to keep them in order, bathe, shower, you brush your teeth. You take a lot of this stuff for granted, and if you're just one of 3 kids in a home that the parents aren't there, a latchkey kid, we wouldn't have that time to go out in the street, and especially those early years were important too. Like once I got into high school, of course, I just went back to being me. But at that point, at least I had a head start.
Right.
So I don't know if it made me want to be a cop, but I definitely had a little bit of an awareness of right and wrong, and I think that's where I became like, once you are aware of what right and wrong is, and if you have church behind you, like that's a sin. We said the rosaries every morning before we went to breakfast. We had mass. Was it mass? It was rosary or the mass every morning before breakfast. Can you imagine sitting through a whole mass before breakfast? Do you
I'd be
know
asleep.
we were only allowed to talk during breakfast? Can you imagine keeping 250, 300 kids quiet?
No, it's impossible.
For lunch and dinner. No, we were allowed to talk at dinner. We weren't allowed to talk at breakfast and lunch. And there wasn't one peep, 300 kids eating at the same time.
Because that's like night and day compared to where I used to go, in middle school, which is for every kid. I think even if you're a good kid and you are on the straight and narrow, the middle school years are always the craziest years, just because those are your formative years. I mean, lunchtime was like we almost had to call in ESU a couple times. We don't have ESU down in New Haven, but we would have needed them on a few occasions. So it's night and day. So it's interesting because like, did you have prior to you joining the force in '92, which we'll talk about? A lot of guys that join the fire service or join the PD, they're working other jobs. Oh, I was this, I was that. I think you did mention you did have a job, right? Prior to the police department. What job was that again?
Yeah, I worked as I had a bunch of jobs. I worked as a doorman, concierge, in a building, a couple of buildings in the city. I also drove like a limousine service. I guess it would be, I wouldn't be equivalent to Uber nowadays because it was for private companies.
Right.
More commercial, like people sending their employees home every day and go back and forth. It wasn't a personal. Most people didn't. People didn't have accounts. It was called computer car. I drove for that for a year. I did a bunch of things. I think what happened was at some point I realized, okay, I got to figure out what I want to do. And underlying in the back of my head, I wanted to be an actor, but I didn't really know how to go about it, and I didn't really. It wasn't something that I was willing to tell everybody, you know what I'm saying? Because especially in my neighborhood where I grew up, what are the guys going to say? What kind of guy wants to be an actor? You know what I'm saying? Not the guy that hangs out in the corner and, looks for fights all day.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Which is what we did, as teenagers pretty much, So, so I kept it to myself. And then at some point I was like, I got to figure something out. So I took all the city tests. And I took FDNY, I took the city, and I took the state troopers. Actually, the state trooper called me. No, NYPD called me first. I took the state trooper first, but NYPD called me first. And while I was in the academy for the NYPD, the state troopers called up. But the thing was, I was already in the academy, and with the troopers, you got to go live in a barracks. And I was a newlywed, and I was, I'm not gonna. I didn't know.
Upheave your life. Yeah.
Yeah, you don't know where you're gonna live. What did
Yeah,
I
exactly.
know anything else
Right.
except Queens at that point in Washington Heights? So I wasn't about to go live all the way upstate, even though now in hindsight it would have been nice, you know.
Who knows? Who knows? But Bill and I talked about this a little bit when he was on, when I was asking him his process to join. But this part we didn't get into, so I'm hoping you can explain it for me, because when you were coming up, this was pre-merger. So there's transit police, there's housing police, and there's the NYPD, which I was referred to as city back then.
Oh yeah.
If you wanted to join either housing or transit, is there a specific test you would take for those departments, or was it just one?
That's a good question. I don't know if they had their own test. I think if you took the one test, and if you really wanted to go to housing or transit, then they'd probably fail you on the psych, so you wouldn't get on the job anyway. I mean, what kind of person in their right mind would want to? You would give up working in New York City, where you can go anywhere, and say, "No, I want to stay in this one particular area."
Yeah.
Because that's what it's like being a housing cop. You can't
Can't
you're
go
not really
anywhere.
answering radio calls for anything else unless it happens on these nicer properties.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? That's not why anybody would sign up to be a cop.
Right.
Unless you knew somebody in housing that could get you through the ranks really quick, and you'd be,
Or transit for that matter.
yeah. Transit's a whole other animal. Like, why would anybody want to be a transit cop?
Yeah.
There's not one person that's ever been on the transit or probably housing that were like that. That's what they wanted to do. It was kind of like you got screwed. You know, you really. That's what it felt like.
Yeah.
To
Yeah.
people that got it. Unless you had a hook.
Right.
Because once again, why would you give up working in the whole city, the thing that's on TV, every TV show, and want to be stuck in the trains all day? It just doesn't, you know what I'm saying?
It doesn't add up. Like John DeResta talked about that. When you had John DeResta on, he was talking about how, welcome, the guy told him, welcome to the New York City Transit Police, either do this or walk out the door like everyone else. And the only reason that he ended up sticking around, as he told you, for a dozen years in transit, was somebody told him, my brother's transit, it ain't so bad. So it's,
well, I want to go back and just close it out with this. Everybody who worked in transit and in housing really learned to enjoy it. For most of all the people that I met,
Mhm.
and probably regretted it a little bit in the beginning once they realized what the NYPD was like. The camaraderie wasn't the same. There was more of an opportunity to get jammed up. Whereas in housing and in transit, small units, there wasn't people gunning for you or looking to see if you're wearing white socks, or did you sign in the book at this time, or did you take 10 minutes longer on your meal than you should have? It wasn't like that. They had a much tighter bond, a much tighter knit. Once they knew how to work it, work their particular job, they were golden, because they knew the ins and outs, where you had to be at what time to get your scratch, your sergeant sign you. You know what I'm saying? How to maneuver it in a much smaller, and there was really no place you can get transferred to either. You're always going to be in transit, another subway somewhere, or another housing in the city. You can go from the 7-5 to the 105. I mean, to the 111. That's a huge difference in your life. You know what I'm
Right.
saying?
And that's what Bill Cannon talked about. It's like, if you're in housing and you're in transit, what he told me was, and we're talking about Mark DeMayo here in the Mike DeMayo podcast. If you were in the NYPD, you can go from wherever you're first assigned to aviation, to the bomb squad, to ESU. You could, the room for advancement was great. And, two stories stick out. These, I mentioned them because sadly they're not with us anymore. They died in the line of duty. But Kevin Gillespie was originally a housing cop, and he came over to the NYPD. His career took off before he was killed. And John Coughlin, who was a sergeant in ESU, who was one of the many great cops who passed on 9/11, he, I believe, was originally a housing cop. And same thing, got to the NYPD and ended up becoming an ESU sergeant. So a lot of cops saw that. So let's get to the, where you joined in 92, because this is an interesting time in the city. When you joined in '92, you picked a heck of a time because crime was pretty, it was coming down from the 2,000 plus murder mark in 1990, but still pretty high. And also, it was right around the time of the Crown Heights riots. So, talk about being thrown into the deep end of the pool. When you first came on, tell me, where was your first command? And how did working during a time like this help sharpen your instincts as a cop and toughen you up?
Well, I grew up in New York, so you went from the 70s and the 80s that were obviously there was crime, but it's kind of sort of you grew up in it, and it just kind of like it was just part of you. You didn't know any better. You took precautions. It was just second nature. Like you did you see the Night Stalker
I've
episode?
heard of it. I haven't seen the documentary on it yet.
All right, so this guy was going in through people's windows, and I'm thinking to myself, I would never sleep with no. He was going through people's doors and windows, but people. I had one lady on the thing. She said, "Oh, I don't want to live in a place where I can't keep my doors open." And I'm like, so why do you even have doors, first of all? Like, if you grew up in New York City, not only do you lock the doors, I remember getting my first apartment. And I had to go to the locksmith so every window could have its own guard. Like, not only do I have a door with the best lock you can get, I got guard, what I'm talking about? The
Yeah.
security gates on the
No,
window.
we have them here in New Haven. New Haven's no walk in the park either, my friend.
So, that's the New York I grew up in. And then all of a sudden, believe it or not, it got worse as far as robberies, because now the robberies, they weren't just muggings anymore. They got violent, strong arm robbery, guns and stuff, crack epidemic. You couldn't leave your car, your radio in the car. And at some point, things had reached. Bill and I talk about it. There's something that happened in New York City, the Brian Watkins murder.
Yep, he mentioned it here.
The subway, they were going to watch the U.S. Open, and his mother was about to get robbed. He stepped in and got stabbed, if I recall correctly.
Yeah.
And it just put a bad. Listen, so many of these stories, the media tries to build them up to see when is the breaking point. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
That one, it turns out it was it. It didn't really need much help. I think New York had had enough, and they wanted something done about it. So it was probably around that time too, as well, that I was getting ready to go into the academy. Because they did this. The president gave money to the cities, almost like now in a way, because everybody was saying defund the police, right? That became a national outcry, during all our protests over the summer and a little bit before and a little bit after that. Defund the police when because they wanted federal money. They didn't want to have to pay for their police the same way the Safe Streets and Safe Cities Act in 19 I guess it was 91 when it came out. I was maybe the second class of it, but the city got federal money to add police officers.
Mhm.
Kind of sort of what they wanted all around the country, this federal money. So they don't really have, they could use their budget to spend on other stuff in their communities rather than, because the police departments are getting very top heavy,
Yeah.
in these people's budgets. If you're an elected official, it's kind of hard to work around it when there's just this immovable chunks. They're all trying to figure out how can we, you know, get rid of and use some of this money that we don't
Mhm.
have to give it to the police. Well, why don't we get the feds to give us some money? So that's what happened back then. The feds gave him money. I was part of a class of 3,000 that went into the police academy, and we got sworn in at midnight, July 30th, 1992. No, June 30th, 1992, at Brooklyn Tech. And they told you, don't quit your job until after you've been sworn in. So we swore in, all of us, right about midnight. And then everybody made a beeline for the phones because I don't think there was no cell phones out yet. So then he saw this long line of people just waiting to call their jobs. Hey, I quit. Hey, I quit. Hey, I quit.
Yeah.
So yeah, everybody did that.
Yeah, I mean that's hey, it was definitely, I'm sure, a dream come true for a lot of people. And like I said, even if you didn't want to be a cop at first, definitely to get on the job, to know that hey, you got 20 years, you get a pension, things like that. Hey, so it can't go wrong with that. So I always ask this to anybody that has worked in fire or the police service when they come on, and I asked this to Bill too. I mean, when you came on, what was the first precinct? I think, like we talked about that. Who was the guys that were most helpful to you? Who were the senior guys in the precinct that you were first at that were most helpful to you when you got on the job?
Um, obviously anybody that that's giving you some helpful advice, and it's all helpful advice, really. In the beginning, is going to be somebody that's useful to you. You get a training sergeant. I remember my training sergeant, Foucault was his name, and he was a good guy. I learned a lot from him. Um, I was in the 102. That was the first precinct that I went to.
Mhm.
And the going into the academy, you're right, was a very, very exciting time. There's nothing that's like it. You're going in, you're going to be in this bubble for 6 months, and it would actually make a great uh, pilot of a TV show. I don't know if they can get away with taping it, doing the whole thing, but um, they'd have to cut out the lessons and stuff like that. But it's really interesting. And what happens, the dynamic between relationships. It's also like, for example, a lot of people are going on the police force now because they want to show a difference. You know what I'm saying? They want to show that we are not like the other police officers, people of color. And then they get on the job, and then they go to, they spend the summer doing these protests, getting hit with bricks and calling foul names, and your family being cursed by people that you don't even know.
Right.
They don't know your background, they don't know your history, and just violence every single night. And then at some point, you look around and he says, "You know what? These are my brothers and sisters in blue." I hate to say it, but that's the point where that us against them mentality comes in, because in that type of situation, this is all I got right now. You're not looking at my color. You don't care what I believe in. You know what I'm saying? And it seemed like everybody was programmed too. Like the hostility was at an all-time other. Katie Couric was on Bill Maher talking about that we need to deprogram the Trump people. I think it's a bigger problem than that. I think everybody who got so involved with politics, you know what I'm saying, all had this glaze over them, man.
Hmm.
Like in another zone. Like the people that were out there protesting, I'm looking at like, how can you stay angry for so long? I've been at a lot of protests. The protests back in the day used to be, they used to go to like let's say uh, abortion rally, right? You'd have
Yeah.
one side of the street would be pro-life, and the other side of the street would be anti-abortion, right?
Mhm.
And the people would be separated. And once the media got there, everybody's having coffee and talking amongst their own group. Once the media got there, the camera guy will go 1, 2, 3, and they'd all go wah, 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 wah. And then they go, thank you, great, great, great. And then they turn the camera around, walk across the street, and do the same 1, 2, 3. They take it back to the studio, they edit it, and that was the news clip for the night about the anti. And then after they got their little camera shot, both the groups went away.
Yeah.
That's what it was like handling a protest back then. I kid you not.
Mhm.
Now these things, they never end. They never
Yeah.
end. They go on for hours and hours, and God bless these guys, man, because I know they are making a difference. It's just not. It's not the difference they originally intended.
And you keep in mind, we're obviously still in the throes of a pandemic. So, in addition to having to enforce whatever it is that you have to enforce, you have to worry about not contracting this virus. And there's been plenty of people in New York that have died from this. Plenty of officers, quite a few from the detective bureau that have gotten this virus and sadly died as a result of it. So, yeah, it's definitely a different ball game now. Down here, it was pretty quiet for the most part, thankfully. But obviously, you look at cities around the country, and yeah, it was a very volatile scene to say the least. So, pivoting back to your career, you talk about it being such a pivotal time, and it was. Because policing in the 90s, like we just discussed, was such a different dynamic for a variety of reasons, not just what you just said, but then it really changed in 94 when Bill Bratton got in there. Yeah, people point to when, and Bill and I talked about this when Giuliani came in. Yeah, that was pivotal, but Bill Bratton deserves a lot of the credit too, because it was him that came in and he instilled the broken windows theory. It was him that came in and gave the guys that were out there working cases cell phones. You know, he really helped modernize the NYPD, and he had a lot of great people working under him: Anemone, Timoney, Maple. So when you were working during this time, you had a couple years on the job when he came on, to see the impact that he was making where you were at the time. How did you personally see the effect in your neighborhood? And for the record, because we didn't clarify this for my listeners, because not all my listeners are from New York, the 102 precinct, where is it located?
Richmond Hill.
Richmond Hill, okay, which is in Queens.
It has a little bit of Forest Hills in there. Mm-hmm. Richmond Hill is the most part of it. A little Glendale in there.
Mm-hmm. So that being said, when you see the measures and initiatives that Bratton's rolling out, how did you personally see the impact out where you were at?
Well, I tell you, when I got on, Dinkins was still the mayor. Mm-hmm. And it was the type of situation not unlike today, except the reverse. So I remember being, walking a foot post and, somebody like smoking pot and had no problem. Yo, how's the foot? Now, I'm kind of sort of making a joke about it, but that was the attitude in the street. Like, you can't, what are you going to do? Lock me up for smoking weed? And that was the attitude. And the reality was, you really weren't going to bring back a pot smoker because there was crime happening outside.
Right.
Like, you could barely go down the street and get a robbery collar. What are you bringing a pot smoker back for? Do you know what I'm saying? And then what happened, we had the new regime. And then all of a sudden, nobody was smoking pot in the street anymore. You know what I'm saying? So it was just like night. It seemed like night and day, but we start enforcing those things. You start taking in the people smoking. In the beginning, they're like, yo, what's up, bro? I was just smoking. And next thing you know, they go in, they tell everybody in the street, yo, be cool, man. They're looking for that now. You know what I'm saying? And it's a different.
They go in their houses instead.
Well, they just go in their car or they go around the corner. They have more respect for the police, right? Just by one simple thing like that. And now it's back to the way it was where, you could be walking down the street and they're like, yo, awesome. They know that you're not going to do nothing. Not that I'm saying people that are smoking pot should be arrested or locked up or whatever your belief is, because I'm kind of liberal in that way. But what I'm saying is that's just the attitude towards the police.
Be thankful that you're not active on Twitter, because I'm on Twitter. I don't get involved in this stuff. I really don't like to. I keep it moving. I promote the show and that's it. But like whenever I follow a lot of the NYPD accounts, whenever they post a bust for somebody jumping a turnstile or for that, the mentions are just nuclear. Like I just close it and I'm like, okay, well, that's enough Twitter for today, because people really do hate that. And imagine you mentioning that. Imagine if Twitter was around in 91, 92, 93, the sentiment probably would have been that times 10. So I want to pivot to your comedy career.
Before you skip that part, let me just let you know a little bit. You see, the reason why they freak out is because New Yorkers would like a free transit system. For years, they've been paying into this transit system that never gets any better. Ever, ever, ever. Ever.
Yeah.
Did I mention it never gets better?
Yes, you did.
It's always gross and it's disgusting. Actually, it was better when I was younger, because when I was younger, a kid, as disgusting as those bathrooms used to be, at least they were available. Do you know what I'm saying?
Right.
You'd never see a bathroom open. I haven't been in a subway in years, but I can't imagine. I don't know where that place is that there's a bathroom open in the subway. That being said, what were we I just lost my whole train of thought.
You're talking about the transit system being gross and people not wanting to pay for it.
Yeah. So it's like, what are you doing with our money? And then they came up with this thing, well, we're going to decriminalize it. I don't know what that really means. Like they're only stopping a certain people going through now. You know what I'm saying? Anybody else, you can hop it or jump it. We're not going to bother you. So it's basically free, but they don't want to make it free, because then if it all of a sudden they want to charge you again, now they're charging for the train again. It's a subway again. It's a big thing. So they're caught in this dilemma. They really want to just tax the cars that come into this city. and that's where they came up with this that thing. If you drive lower than 61st Street, you're going to get another toll. But they couldn't really do it because of the COVID. It was already supposed to be enacted.
Mhm.
So now
Yeah,
they
they have
have
to
to
pivot
waiting
away.
around. They have the traffic police writing summonses like crazy. So because who's targeted? Having a car is a privilege. They want people to get on the subway for free, so they don't want those arrests anymore, and they don't want marijuana arrests anymore. Um, so that's if you're going to open up a Twitter page and you're going to post this kind of stuff, you have to you got to be ready to get an onslaught.
And that's what it is.
Yeah.
Because all you have to do is look at the numbers, like, because Twitter has a feature where you can see how many people retweeted it, how many people quote tweeted it. It's ugly, man. Like the NYPD, I remember the other day, they see some guy that he had a bag full of that stuff, and then he had jumped the turnstile. And you go through the mentions, pig this, pig that, screw you guys, this, that, the other. I'm just like, sheesh, it's tough. I know social media is not real life.
Yeah, but it works the other way too. Because don't forget, God forbid you get into a situation and all of a sudden, you know, we go to your tweets, we find out who your name is, we look you up on social media, and you already have a whole thread of years of bashing the NYPD and how cops are this and that and the other. So it works both ways.
It does.
And right now, that's a lot of things people don't realize, that it's going to work both ways. So, it's being weaponized. Your social media, and everything you post, it's weaponized. And the gun is pointing right at you, just waiting for the time, that you screw up for us to put. Look at, you're a sports fan, right?
Yep.
The guy wanted to put down. He was a writer, sports writer. He wanted to put down this college coach for having said something about 10 or 15 years ago on his first teams doing a rally or something like that. Something that was could be considered homophobic. All right. Now,
Mhm.
mind you, 15 years ago, and the
Well,
guy
different.
was, yeah. So whatever. This guy made it a point to bring it up now. Only his Twitter feed, the sports writer, has homophobic quotes, many of them not going back that far. So
Right.
he actually got burned, that reporter. So, if you live in we go back to these old sayings all the time, but that's because history repeats itself. If you
Right.
live in a glass house, you shouldn't be throwing stones.
Exactly. And that's why, like, the scariest part, like, I remember in one of my final college classes before graduation, we had a guest speaker and that was talking about how even if you delete these tweets, they can find them, which is why, for me, I've cleaned up I never used to put vulgar things on Twitter, but, I used to get a little too crazy and amped up about the Knicks. I'm still a Knicks fan, but after a particularly bad Knicks loss, my Twitter feed was nuclear. So, imagine if I wanted to say, let's say, and this is never going to happen, but let's say I wanted to work as an intern at Madison Square Garden in the future, and they find a tweet I had about how I'm calling this guy in the Rangers a bum or this guy in the Knicks a bum. It wouldn't happen for that reason, or they'd call me up, hey, Mike, about this. And of course, after I'm done crapping myself, it's a difficult thing to have to explain. So yeah, you're right. It does go both ways for sure.
Yeah, it's a shame with the Twitter. You're better off deleting it. I
I
don't know.
have.
I don't have an answer for any of this. I just try to keep to not comment anymore.
Yeah, it's better.
I've gotten almost past the point where I don't even comment,
It's
because I
better.
used to write a paragraph, then delete it. And then, very rarely now I catch myself. I'm like, what are you doing? Don't. It's like I smack myself in the hand. Don't you dare. Don't get close to that.
Yeah. No, it's
What's the
better.
point? That we go back to the original question about Dinkins and Giuliani, and that was the first time I ever voted. And I was really like, I guess by that point I was 25, almost 26 years old,
Mm.
and I didn't know anything about politics, but I remember that Giuliani and Dinkins were they were uh, they were competing for the to be mayor, running against each other, and it was close. I remember dragging all my family out, because we had to get Giuliani in office. It was going to be better for the police, and he won. Very close race. And in the end, it helped New York City a lot. I mean, Dinkins left behind the Arthur Ashe Stadium, which is, you have to give people credit where it's due. That is it's something that brings in the revenue that, from what I heard from somebody who was in charge of the detail, when you go there to work for those 2 weeks, you're part of a detail as a police officer, and you're going to be working the U.S. Open. You're going to be making a lot of overtime, and it's a really good gig. I mean, because there's no crime there. You're basically just hanging out, walking around, trying to figure out what are you going to eat next. That's it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
If you do, it's like somebody complaining that their wine wasn't chilled. You know what I'm saying? Like, they so, or I don't even know what they, but there wasn't really nothing, maybe a
It's
pickpocket.
bougie.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
pickpockets, you know what I'm saying? People looking to scam tickets. That was another thing. For the most part, it was a great thing. And those 2 weeks make more than every single sporting event put together.
Yeah, and
Super Bowl,
it's
World
oh, go ahead,
Series,
sorry.
NBA makes more than all of it. Those 2 weeks.
And it's right near City Field too, right?
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, right near City, because it reminds me of a great line. I mentioned this to Bill. I had read this book because during this quarantine, we're all just reading, trying to pass the time by, or at least most of us are. And there was this book on, huh?
Not
you. Not you. There's this book on the Mets of 1999 and 2000. I know you're a big Mets fan, and there was this part in the book. You remember when the Mets played the Braves and they scored 10 runs in one inning? And Piazza hits that big home run down the left field line. They were extra patrols for that series because this was the first time that John Rocker was coming back to New York, since he said all those crazy things in SI about the city. And they asked one of the Mets fans that's waiting to get into the game, asked one of the cops assigned to the detail, who you're rooting for tonight, the Mets or the Braves. The cop shoots back, I'm rooting for overtime. So yeah, it's not a bad gig if you can get it. That's why I envy those cops when I look at the old clips on YouTube working the details at Shea or at the Open or at Yankee Stadium. Like, you guys have it made, man, especially being a big baseball fan.
I used to work in the task force, in the Queens task force. And in order to be on the Shea Stadium detail, you had to work in the Queens task force. The same way, if you wanted to be in the Yankee detail, you had to work in the Bronx task force. So I worked in Queens, but I could never get into the Shea Stadium detail. I mean, you had to be hooked. I was hooked to get into this place, but I wasn't hooked enough to get in to the Shea Stadium detail. And those guys had some rack. You know what they used to do was, because if the Mets are in town, you didn't really have any specific days off.
Mm-hmm.
You were working until they left town. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And then you could be off. So if they had 5 days in a row playing, you were working 5 days in a row. 6, 7 games in a row, you were working.
Right.
And you end up getting a lot of overtime that way. So these guys used to come back to the Queens task force in the winter, and they'd have 30 days of vacation piled up for what they did over the summer in overtime. I don't think you were only allowed to take a certain amount of that overtime in cash, and the rest had to be in time, or maybe it all had to be in time, but you had accumulated all this time off from working all that overtime. So if they didn't like the post that they got that night, they would just raise their hands and say, I'm going to go home. And they would fill out a sheet and just go home. If they didn't like where they were supposed to go. Or sometimes they would just come in, and I'm recording now. Hold on 1 second.
Live podcasting at its finest. We're talking with Mark DeMayo here on the Mike the New Haven podcast. Mark, who's one half of the Police Off the Cuff podcast. Of course, he's also a comedian and an actor. And of course, he's joining me in episode 49. Quick side note, Ken Davidoff is joining me for episode 50 of the Mike the New Haven podcast. Ken is a baseball columnist for the New York Post. I was just spitballing and promoting my other stuff while you were...
sorry about that.
No, don't worry about it. I used the time to plug myself a little bit, so it worked out.
So where were we? So that detail was, you had to be hooked to get in that. I would have loved to get that detail.
Oh, it would have been great. It would have been great for sure. I mean, you don't even have to be a Met fan, just be a baseball fan in general. So I want to pivot to your comedy career because it was around, I believe, 1995, 96-ish per what you described before that you started doing stand-up. And the New York City comedy scene has always been fairly active, to say the least. I mean, it's where a guy like Artie Lang came from. Jackie the Joke Man, of course, both are him and Artie Lang of Howard Stern fame. Anthony Cumia and Jim Norton of Opie and Anthony fame, and so much more. Rich Voss, the list goes on. So tell me, what inspired you to get into comedy, and who would you say were your biggest influences growing up?
Well, I was an actor first.
Hmm.
So I get in the police department. I got the job. And now one day, I remember after roll call, I found a wall. I leaned against it. And I said to myself, I don't know why. I just had this epiphany. It says, all right, now you got the job. Because I was married. I was a newlywed. And I wanted to make sure that her family knew that I wasn't off on this wild goose chase of just being an actor. And where's the money going to come from, right? So I
Right.
had this secure job. And now I was comfortable. And I had this thing that I couldn't breathe. I said, as soon as the thought came to my head, I says, okay, good. Now you can start what you really want to do and go into acting. Up until this point, wasn't in love with the job. I didn't know anything about it. I got 6 months on. I had fun in the police academy. Um, I'm liking what I'm doing so far, but I also thought, you know what? I'm going to start chasing after. Plus, I also heard from a lot of cops that they all had side jobs. One guy was a carpenter. The next guy was a plumber. The next guy was a gardener. Everybody had these other jobs, and I'm like, I don't want another job. You know what I'm saying? Like everybody had a
Yeah.
side job. It says if I'm going to do something that I'm going to do, try to make some money off of on the side, I want it to be something I really, really always wanted to do. So I found out. Don't ask me how, about HB Studios in the city. Somebody told me about Backstage newspaper.
Uh-huh.
I got that. It used to come out on Thursdays. I took the Backstage newspaper. I found an acting school, HB Studios in the Village. I started going there. I had Trudy Steibel as a teacher. I studied with her for 2 years. And then I felt comfortable enough about my technique that I started looking for acting work. Um, I also joined a theater company, the 13th Street. I didn't join. I got accepted into a theater company. And then I joined. I had to audition for them. 13th Street Theater Company. Edith O'Hara used to run it. And at the same time, I was auditioning, and I wound up getting really the first two parts I ever auditioned for, and and then I was up for third watch. Um,
Great show.
so we had Joe Lisi on the show a couple of days ago. He's probably the most successful actor that came out of the police department. But I've had my share of good fortune too. Not as
Mhm.
many roles as Joe has, but that's also because comedy found me too. And I'll tell you, I'm on the way. My story's on the way there. So when I auditioned for Third Watch, I got to a point. This was for a character. The show didn't come out yet. I got to a point where I had gone through like 2 or 3 auditions, and now I'm going to meet with the NBC execs, and it was me in between this other guy, and it was a Spanish character, the EMS guy. He got killed off the first season,
Bobby
but
Cannavale.
yeah, I forget. Did he get killed off? I never really watched the show.
His character got killed off. Yeah, Bobby Cannavale. I think he got stabbed.
Okay, well, whatever that might have been it, right? So we're there, and as soon as I walk in the room, she says to me, "Are you really Latino?" And as soon as I had to explain that, I was like, "I'm not getting this thing. It's just new."
Yeah.
And but I had gotten so close that I got nervous. I was like, you know what? At some point, I'm gonna get something. I'm gonna have to make a decision to quit, and this thing is moving a little too fast for me. You know what I'm saying? And I don't want to. I don't want to quit right now. I can't trust it. So I said, let me try something else. So then I started. I said, yeah, I always wanted to do stand up. So went back to Backstage. I found some guy who was holding auditions for comedians, and it was called Doc Livingston's Comedy Posse. So I wound up getting in there, and that's where the comedy career took off. I wound up performing in Brooklyn at this place called the Palm Court, and that's where I met, you name it, Rudy Rush, Donnell Rollins, uh, Drew Frazier, talent, JB Smooth, uh, G White. I'm Kareem Green. I just every single um, urban comedian, Jason Andors, came through the place. I know I'm forgetting a bunch of names. Jimmy Martinez, so many every Capone, every urban comic that you can name came through. Not came through, started there, but at least stopped by and did a spot every Monday night. And this went out for a couple of years. And
Yeah.
then it was Pork Knockers. Donnell used to host that. So I got into this whole urban comedy circuit, and then I kind of detoured back to trying to get into comedy clubs, which I did. And then at some point, I kept one foot in both, because back then it was a little bit different. Now, like back then, the comedy clubs had, if they had their black guy, they were good. If they had their Spanish guy, and not every club even had a Spanish guy. I'm saying? So a couple that were passed
Yeah.
in the club, everybody else who wanted to be a comedian, you had to find your own circuit. So that's what they did. The urban comics.
I gotta ask, is that where the stage name Mark DeMayo came from? Because your actual name, for the record, folks, Mark DeMayo's actual name, I'm not going to give his government, but it's Mark DeMayo is not his actual government. It's something else. What was that?
My name is Vanex Sanchez.
Okay, that's his actual government. So where does the Mark come from?
I got baptized Mark.
Okay. All right, so that's where
my name is, everybody calls me Mayo or Mayo. Because it's Mayo Vanex.
Yeah.
So if you cut it down, I never liked Mayo Vanex. Nobody could say it. It's not now. We were a melting pot here in New York, but it wasn't like now.
Yeah.
Neighborhoods were more separated. So in Astoria, where I lived with my mom, it was all Greek and Italian, some Irish.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? And then, like, everybody had names like Mary, Peter, Paul, right out of the Bible. And all of a sudden, I'm sitting there in class with Mayo Banix. Like, nobody could say the name. It was him. So I cut it down to Mayo or Mayo. And then when I got into SAG, the Screen Actors Guild, I could come up with a name, a stage name. So that was my opportunity to do something, have the name I always wanted. So I took my baptismal name, Mark, and Mayo, I just put a D-E in front of it. So it's Mark DeMayo.
And that worked out, because I honestly, until I saw, because, in preparing for this, I saw some of your comedy sets. I wouldn't have guessed that you were Dominican until I saw a commercial you did. Where, dude, I didn't know you could speak Spanish that good, because I didn't even know you were Spanish. I'm like, you're doing that phone commercial, si eso fue muy fácil. I'm like, yo, he actually could speak it. I didn't know. So yeah, you never judge a book by its cover.
We filmed those 3 days of shooting, right?
Mm-hmm.
The regular commercials for Optima, me, Joe Vesey, Leonard, and Casey, right?
Mm-hmm.
Plus the girls. But we were shooting for 3 days, no problems at all. Like,
right.
We would the director would give us this, a tweak, that, and the other. All of a sudden, I had to do that Spanish one by myself, and I had the people from Optimum there, but the Spanish people. And hey, man, I can't tell you, man. After every take, they would whisper to each other, and then one of them would tell the director, and then the director would tell me, and it was all over like a thing with the word.
Yeah.
Sí, mamá, ya todo está listo, right? Ya todo está listo para la mudanza. So I would say that, and they would like 5 minutes later, they would come back and can he say listos or make sure he says the S in listo? Okay, okay? Sí, mamá, todo está listo para la mudanza. Can you say the S? I'm like, what? And okay, I'm the nicest guy in the world for the first 10 extra takes. And then after that, I'm like, yo, what do these people want, man?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? But it just happened to be, trying to, some people have to they have to do something. If you give them a job to do, they can't just, leave it well enough alone. Oh, this looks good. They got to do something,
Yeah, something extra.
Yeah, something to just create work, so it looks like they're working.
Mm-hmm. No, it's interesting. I'm glad I learned that. So, I do want to ask, because it's a little different now, because you haven't been able to do a set in a little bit because of the pandemic. But in going to, in preparing for your sets, I know this may seem like such a mundane, question, but how does a comedian go about preparing for his sets? Because it's not just about obviously the material, it's about the execution of the material. So how do you personally prepare for a comedy set?
Well, you have the material that you've worked on. That would probably become your set, right? And for somebody who has been doing it for as long as I have, I have like a set, and then there's new jokes that you write, and you fall in love with the new jokes. They're like your little babies. You want to do them, but you don't know if they're ready for the big show yet. So you use your spots in the middle of the week to try out this new material. And then once you feel comfortable with it and it gets its legs, and also too, you have to figure out where it's going to go in your 45-minute, 50-minute set,
Right.
because you're probably going to have to take something out to put that in. And where does that, some people do their comedy is like they don't really have a through line.
Mm.
Mine does. So if I start talking about like pop culture, you're probably going to get that for a few minutes. And then if I start talking about my police career, you're probably going to get that for 15, 20 minutes, maybe a half hour.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? So we'll break up the show in half. So where do I put this new joke that I have that I'm in love with, that I love telling, that I'm really, but it really doesn't have a place. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the preparation where I'm at right now, trying to figure out where this new joke that I've been working on all week is going to, and sometimes I just do it up front because that's the best way to do it.
Right.
And, there's trains of thoughts. But so for example, I remember Jerry Seinfeld saying that he likes to put his new jokes in the middle, to really give them an opportunity, like a soft landing. And then you had somebody, if I remember correctly, it may have been Woody Allen, said he likes to do his new jokes up front to see if they're any good. And there's a certain feeling that you get about something when it's funny, when you think it's funny. So if we could be hanging out backstage and literally like just crack up over something, and then I'll, if I thought of it, I say I'm going to do that right now. Or if you thought of it, I'm going to say, hey, can I do that?
Sure.
I'd say, hey, are you going to use that? If you say no, I'm not going to use it. I was like, all right, and then you'll just go. And you got this, you just think it's funny. So you want to tell everybody.
Mm.
That's the beauty of it. You think it's funny, and I want to tell everybody. That's the fun.
It's spontaneous because it's kind of like, granted, my podcast isn't necessarily comedic, at least not intentionally. It's not comedic, but it's kind of like what I come up when I'm trying to come up with questions. I'll run around. I'm thinking to myself, and it'll come to me. I'm like, yo, I could ask that. And I'll go around the house when I'm by myself because I'm self-conscious. I don't want anybody to think I'm a crazy person. I'll say the question out loud as if I'm in an interview form, to give you a little inside baseball, folks. And I'm like, that's okay. If it sounds good, if it comes out right, I can ask this. And yeah, preparation, that kind of preparation, it's not uncommon. And it's good because at least and if it doesn't work, at least there's not the uncertainty of, I never used that. I'll never know. As Wayne Gretzky once said, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So pivoting back to your police career, it was around this time that you got your gold shield. You were promoted to detective, presumably after doing some really good work. Because for those of you that don't know, I clarified this in my episode with Bill Cannon. In New York City, you can't take a test to become detective. That's given to a patrol officer on merit. He or she has to earn that gold shield, and Mark did. And you were promptly assigned to the warrant squad. Now, the warrants division is among the most action-packed divisions in the department, to say the least. It's pretty dangerous. Although 3 of the officers that have been killed in the line of duty in recent years weren't killed serving warrants. Charles Davis was a cop with the warrant squad. He was killed off duty as a security guard in '96. Detective Sonny Archer was killed in a car crash in 2011, and Joe Lem was killed overseas in 2015. But nonetheless, given the danger that exists with that kind of unit and each warrant that you're serving, some of them definitely on violent offenders, what made you want to be in that unit?
Well, before I answer your question, I just want to commend you on your memory and your memory retention. I mean, I lived these events, and most of the stuff I don't remember. Like, I'm not good with dates like that. Like, and remembering vague, everything's vague to me. I don't know why that is. Actually, I do have a feeling I know why that is. Anyway, that, and also this is your career, just so you know, by the way. I mentioned this before we started, but you do something. We rise, and I know a lot about this business, and I'm telling you, you're going to be a huge, huge star. You definitely have a way. You have the way you talk and your mannerisms. It's working for you. Don't change
Thank you.
nothing.
Thank you.
And you're on camera because that's what it's all about. Nobody cares about anything else. How do you look on camera? If you're annoying to look at, I don't want to look at you. I like looking at you.
Thank you.
So, back to your point, which was how becoming a detective. I worked in Queens, and I this is funny that how the world works in the real police department. See, I was working 6 at night to 2 in the morning in the task force.
Mhm.
And the reason why I was doing that was because I was studying acting. I like those hours because on Friday, I used to go to my acting class. And then during the week, anywhere from Monday through Thursday, I used to meet with my scene partner, wherever, in their apartment, my apartment, wherever we could meet to rehearse our scenes. And my big excitement was performing my scene on Sunday. So for 2 years, working in the task force, it was good for me because I was studying my acting, going to class on Friday. Now I wanted to join the theater company. So I needed to work days. So now I started looking around where I could work days. And the day shift that they had in the police in the task force wasn't really accommodating for me. They used to do a 10 to 6. And in order for me to, if I was in the theater company to perform during the week and on the weekend, I would have to be in the theater by 6 o'clock already because most show times are like 7:30. I couldn't be getting out of work at 6. It just wasn't going to work.
Right.
So I was looking all around other places for me to work. I put an application in for Manhattan traffic. I was willing to, direct traffic just so I can be in Manhattan already and work these early hours. Long and behold, somebody, a sergeant that I worked with, her name was Sergeant Coyne, calls me up one morning and she says, "Are you still interested in doing those day tours?" Because a couple of weeks before, she had told me, "Listen, there's nothing here for you. We don't do those hours here." Because I asked her, "Is there anything I could do to start earlier?" So she goes, "Are you still looking to do?" And I said, "Yes." "Yeah, definitely." She goes, "Okay, because they're starting this new unit here in where I worked, and they're going to be picking up people on warrants. I don't know what it is. You might have to stay in traffic court all day, and the people that warrant out when they're answering for their summonses, you might have to take them to court." I was like, "Fine, I'm in." She goes, "Well, you don't know the hours yet." And I was like, "What are they?" She goes, "I think it was 5:30 to 1, 5:30 to 2. 5:30 in the morning would start like that."
Mhm.
And I said, "That's beautiful. I'm in." She goes, "You really want to do that?" I didn't care what they were going to make me do. I just wanted those hours so I can get into a theater company. And long and behold, now I'm doing warrants in the morning. And it turned out to be a great gift. And then one day we get a new police commissioner. His name was Carrick, Bernard Carrick, who
Yes.
was, as far as he went in rank, was a detective. But where did he work? In the warrant squad. And he knew the effectiveness of the warrant squad. And he knew that how much it would help with the broken windows theory if we kept these people, these recidivists, if we kept them going through this system. So
Mhm.
you make an arrest. I mean, you get arrested, let's say. You're going to be off the street, no matter what the petty crime is. You're going to be off the street for 1 or 2 days going through the system. Then you get out. If you don't go back to court, you're going to be brought back on the warrant. That's another day or two. So, there's a lot of days you're missing from the street if you are a habitual criminal. Like, you just, even if it's little stuff that, just destroys the ambiance of a neighborhood.
Right.
You could have that one mental guy walking down the street with no shirt, in the middle of the summer, just screaming stuff, walking down your avenue. Every day you see that guy. And he's intimidating and he's scary. Like, and once in a while throw a garbage can or curse somebody out or punch somebody. You're like, why can't we get this guy off the street? Well, that was the idea. So Carrick became mayor, and then he wanted to build up the warrant squads. And it just so happened I just fell in line with that. And at some point, they were like, "Do you want to go become a detective?" I was like, "Yeah, absolutely. If it means I could stay doing warrants, stay with these hours, because the hours were perfect. Now I already was acting, and I started doing comedy. So I needed those to be off at night. So everything had to do with where I worked had to do with how it was aligning with my other job, my other career.